Ram Madhav must take a bow, because I haven't seen in recent times somebody build an India or a Bharat institution so well.
Who would have imagined that India would be clearly recognized all over the world as a rising power that will be a decisive voice in the development of the 21st century?
Present world order, there is no legitimacy to it.
India itself has to consider its role on the international scene.
Bharat and the new world order. Reform or disrupt.
India has the opportunity to enhance the Bharat brand.
Yes, friends, so whenever I see a title or a subject, the very first thing I do is to look at the subtext in order to check the context, because there is no text without context. And if you want to find out the context of our present subject, which has been well mentioned, imagining the world and Bharat Ratna, first, before we begin, we must take a bow. Or not we must take a bow, actually Ram Madhav must take a bow. Because I haven't seen in recent times somebody build an India or a Bharat institution so well. It really is quite remarkable. So right in front of us, actually, we have a great instance of the Bharat brand and the Bharat institution being created, with a presence now which is quite dramatic. When I saw the imagining India's decade phrase, I was reminded of a well-known saying, those who want to have a New Year's wish have not met God. Imagining a decade, and this is a suggestion for our panelists today, requires, I tell you, some extraordinary daring. Let's take a look. Just to give you an example, in my view, and you may contest it, modern history begins with 1910, in that decade. Just stand on the edge of a decade and imagine the future, and just check whether reality is about 10 steps, 10 paces, 10 leaps, quantum leaps ahead of whatever you could have imagined. Who in 1910 could have imagined a world war? Nobody actually knew of a concept called a world war in 1910. Who could have imagined that in 1918, two individuals would appear who would change the course of history in ways which are unprecedented? One of them was Mahatma Gandhi and the other was Lenin. You stand on the edge of 1920 and I dare you to believe that non-violence as a concept was going to change, bring down colonialism. Unbelievable. Who is going to believe it? Who is going to believe that in the 1920s there is going to be a Great Depression which is going to destroy capitalism for at least 10-15 years? Nobody could believe it. Who's going to predict it? Just think in 1939 or 1929 that there is going to be a world war. In 1939, first there is going to be a rise of an evil called Hitler, which is going to take over Germany. And there is going to be another world war which will leave the First World War behind in devastation. You sit on the edge of 1940. We are imagining the decade. And can you imagine that colonialism is over? Because with India's freedom, British colonialism was born in India, it died in India. and once colonialism died in India, it could not be sustained anywhere else. Nowhere. But more than that, imagine that out of India there would be partition. Who would have imagined it? I call partition one of the biggest sins in history. Imagine in 1950, I was talking of the First World War. One of the things about the First World War was the complete collapse of empires. Two empires of the old empires, India and China, had gone in 19th century. But the three great empires, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Ottoman Empire, and the Tsars, all three collapsed in World War. And with their collapse, what did we see? We saw the emergence of a global order, which is completely different. When I think, by the way, of the world wars, sir, we have had 3 world wars in the 20th century. The First World War merged into the second, right? Second into the third. The Third World War was the Cold War. The Second World War ended, but the First World War hasn't ended, as we know from West Asia. And the Third World War hasn't ended, as we know from Ukraine. So history as a continuum is extremely, even radical. Truth is far more radical than our imagination. In the 1950s, leave aside anything else, end of colonialism and so on. Who would have imagined Sputnik in 1950? Who would have imagined Yuri Gagarin? Right? And I tell you, one of the greatest achievements of mankind also happened in the 1950s. It was America's rejection of poverty as a modern reality. In the 1950s, America ended poverty and created a template for all democracies. That whatever else you can do, poverty will not be acceptable to the people, and this is what we are facing. Now, in 1962, just to come quickly, I'm trying to finish things off. Who's going to imagine 1962 war with China? The consequences of which we are even facing today. Just a month ago, NSA and Wang came to a deal on China. We are still going through the consequences of 62. 65 war. Defeat of America in Vietnam. Could you have imagined in 1960? 1970, Bangladesh. Who would have imagined it? 1975, wherever you look, you find nothing but something which is incredible. Could you have imagined emergency? It happened. 1980, fall of the Soviet Union. Who was going to predict it? Right? End of communism in China. Who would have predicted Deng's cat? Right? I don't care what the color of the cat as long as it catches mice. That was the end of communism. Standard communism in China leading 1990s, economic reforms, Kargil. Who would have imagined India and Pakistan would both be nuclear powers by the end of 1990s? In 2000, just stand in 2000 and let me, who among you would have predicted 9/11? Right? Or for that matter, the rise of terrorism as an instrument of evil. Or the empowerment of masses through the mobile phone. Nobody would have imagined. In 2010, and really now I'm cutting the story short, in 2010, who would have imagined that a gentleman called Narendra Modi was going to come to power? Right? And was going to remain for 15 years. Nobody had won 3 consecutive elections since Jawaharlal Nehru. Right? Indira Gandhi won 3 elections, but not consecutively. And just to bring you up to date, who would have imagined that Congress would have been reduced to single figures in Maharashtra? Just one last point, since we are discussing decades, I tell you, and we're discussing 2015-25, before we discuss 25-35, I have a suggestion that we call it, the age between 15 and 25, any human being sees more radical change between 15 and 25 than any other decade of his life. right? Let's look at the future from the perspective of what I call Gen 1525. That we are all 15 years old. How much radical change will we see by the time we are 25? Sir, would you like to take the lead?
Yeah. Well, there's so many areas where we are experiencing accelerating change. In geopolitics, the mic is not working? I can be louder. I'll try this, and then suddenly the mic will start working and you'll all turn deaf. Who would have imagined that a Donald Trump would become president of the United States? Who would have imagined that Elon Musk would turn his energy to trying to restructure the bureaucracy of the state, to change the nature of the state, aided by AI? Who would have imagined that China, after so many decades of peaceful rise, would decide that maybe it was time to stop being quite so peaceful? Right? And who would have imagined that India would be clearly recognized all over the world as a rising power that will be a decisive voice in the development of the 21st century? So given all of these unimaginable things that have happened, I am very cautious about making predictions about the next 10 years. All right, you want a prediction?
Well, we have to keep the discourse moving.
Okay. I guess I'm going to predict that by 2035, India will matter more to the world than the European Union.
Maybe it already does.
Those are the safest predictions, the ones that have already come true.
True. Right. Milinda, we should go next.
The topic, Bharat and the New World Order. That is what I think was mentioned. I would add a semicolon to that and say escaping Lord Macaulay's shadow or exorcising Lord Macaulay's ghost. That would be the addition. And I think Prime Minister Modi has taken the lead in that. I think Minister Jayashankar, and you should not underestimate your role either. And last but not least, I think Ram Madhav has been one of the pioneers and the leaders in it, because I've been reading a lot of what he wrote. That's where I would like to start my intervention. My generation, I'm 60 now, has been I'm from Sri Lanka, as you know, conditioned by Lord Macaulay's legacy. Our worldview, and I beg indulgence from any Anglo-Saxons here, what I say will be politically correct, I hope. Basically, our frame has been that. And time has come, I think, to break that. That's where we have to go now. When I arrived here, and I'm talking of a corner of Bharat, which is the state of Karnataka, I landed at Kempegowda Airport, probably one of the most modern airports in the world. And as we were landing, you see Indigo, you see Air India planes. And as we know, I think both those airlines together have placed an order, I think, for 1,200, I believe, new airplanes. One of the largest orders for airplanes in the world. Then you come out and you see the Kempegowda statue, representing the Vijayanagara Empire, which is probably one of the greatest empires, I think, actually, Minister Sitaraman referred to yesterday, where the spread right through trade went into East Asia. And this is just one empire that India had. The Maurans, the Cholas, and many, many more. So I think India's contribution comes civilizationally. And in my view, brand even cheapens it, frankly. Because this is not just another brand, it's not a commercial brand, it's something much bigger. It's much more holistic. So I feel that is the direction we have to move, to look at it deeper, bigger than a brand, something larger, and escaping Lord Macaulay, bringing something new. And that is happening. I mean, all these conversations at these meetings, I think it is happening. I, as a Sri Lankan, can offer a different perspective because we are all part of the same DNA. We are part of, civilizationally, we are linked. Starting from the Ramayana. Sri Lanka, Lanka is from the Ramayana. Then we come through Buddhism, which Minister Sitaraman referred to yesterday. King Ashoka chose to send his daughter and son to Sri Lanka with the message of Buddhism. So India's greatest emperor, why did he do that? Why did he choose his son and daughter? I mean, it's a special relationship. Then we have had our own relations, some good, some bad, I must say, with the Pandyans, the Cholas, the Kalingas. I mean, we've had a Pallavas. We have dealt in different ways. Some have been more in a warlike setting, others have been in the form of alliances. The Mauryan Empire gave us the greatest gift, which was Buddhism, of course. So when we look at it civilizationally, I see this connection. There is a whole region civilizationally connected. It's not only India, Sri Lanka, East Asia. In the modern context, it has gone beyond. And that was mentioned, I think, when you listen to Dr. Jayashankar's presentation and others, how Indian civilization in different ways has spread. The time to move on from Macaulay comes at an interesting point in my view. When Lord Macaulay wrote his famous Minute, did he imagine that somebody of Indian heritage would become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Did he imagine that somebody of Indian heritage would have a shot at the presidency of the United States? Did he imagine that Silicon Valley would be dominated by people of Indian heritage? It's interesting to think about it. But I think now the time has come for us to shift. And there I have an idea for Ram Madhav especially, a thought, since this is an ideas conclave. The British have used the Commonwealth, interestingly, as a mechanism for continuing Lord Macaulay's vision in its own way. And I'm not against it. I'm just making a point. Why not India think of a forum of civilizations? This is my working title. It could mean something else. It could be something else. Where maybe India Foundation could do it. Annually invite people from different civilizations that are linked to India to have a discussion and to develop the concept, develop this soft power. Because I find the Commonwealth has soft power. I mean, language, I mean, there's culture, way of thinking, etc. But this civilization also has soft power. Now, my language, Sinhala, is Sanskrit-based. Our second language in Sri Lanka is Tamil. But as you go right across the world, Sanskrit is a root. When we talk of yoga, we talk of Ayurveda, that has spread. So this is a thought, and maybe for Ram Madhav to think about, I think. Maybe I call it a forum of civilizations. It could be something else, some working title we need to have. That's my contribution.
Thank you. I think we'll take this up later on after everybody's intervention is over. But your mention of Macaulay reminded me of a very famous remark during the height of the non-cooperation movement, where one of the leaders of the non-cooperation movement asked the Viceroy, I said, if you didn't want us to rebel, why did you educate us? Right? So therefore, there are consequences to the sequence. We will take up this, as I said, and just to give you an idea of the question that I would like to raise for you to discuss, from the civilizational basis, let's go to Prime Minister's repeated statement on war not being a solution. Is that one of the ideas that will determine the next decade? But before that, please, sir.
Okay, so good evening to everyone. I will bring up, I think, a little bit of a different perspective, since I'm not coming from a superpower like America, and not from the civilization area of India, although my mother was born in Peshawar, which she calls the occupied northern India. But my point as an Israeli is that I want to point to a challenge that I think India will face, whatever the shape of the global order, or maybe global disorder, we will see in the next decade. Because of course we cannot know how things are going to develop. Is America in decline or not? Maybe partial decline. Is there going to be a new Cold War with China or not? It's very hard to predict such developments. However, what I want to point is that India itself has to consider its role on the international scene. In what sense? In the sense that it was mentioned many times here, also in the idea that war is not a solution, that there is this view that we Indians, meaning the argument is, we can be okay with everyone. Meaning we can be friends with Putin and Trump, we can be friends with China and Europe, we can be friends with Iran and Israel, which in theory is right. However, the danger is that going toward the next decade, or 2 decades or 3 decades, but that this attitude of not wanting conflicts, and I think that no one really wants conflict, may be confused with the reality that sometimes conflicts are pushed upon you. Meaning, India didn't want to be involved in the Pakistan civil war of 1971. It was pushed on it, and it had to be involved, and the result was positive, but it wasn't a plan by India to attack then East Pakistan and what became Bangladesh. So, and similarly, India has no interest in any border conflict with China, but it might be that it's pushed on it. Now, I'm saying that quite uniquely, the Indian civilization, this is my view, you can contest it if you want, it's quite uniquely unaggressive in historical terms relative to other civilizations. Meaning many other civilizations were inherently imperialistic. It was their raison d'etre. Even China, in a sense, had this view of, we control all the important parts of the world. Yes, there are some places otherwise, but it's not important. And we are like, and of course, like everywhere in Indian history, you might find some empire, some states, but overall the civilization of India is not very aggressive or expansive in its core. And in a sense, this transmitted after independence into the idea of non-alliance. Now, that is fine when the world was basically divided between 2 superpowers and you don't want really to fight against this or that. But I think that in a possible world disorder now, there is a danger that this non-aggression will be transformed into some kind of passivity or even deference. And I want to emphasize that in the past, when India was controlled by the British, it wasn't conquered by Britain in one day. It actually was a gradual and process where a company took over. So what I mean is that I think that India should think about this assertiveness, because if it does not want to be in danger in the next decade of becoming, not formally, but practically dominated by some hegemon de facto, I take this view out of the historical experience of the Jewish civilization, that in the period that we were powerless, everything could be done to us. And our lesson is today that to be very careful not to let events or other powers control our destiny. And so I think that this challenge is very important for India because it goes in a sense against the, I would say, Pacific tendency of its civilization.
I think perhaps this is the right moment to suggest, again for consideration, there is a great misconception about non-violence. Non-violence is not passive, and it is not passivity. To begin with, I think the contribution of non-violence to the 20th century has not been fully understood. Non-violence not only ended colonialism, which it did once in India, but non-violence ended apartheid in South Africa. Non-violence diluted, I would not say eliminated, racism, anti-black racism in America. And non-violence ended the Soviet Union. Communism, Soviet Union was not defeated by violence. It was defeated by people's uprising. The power and the will of the people. Now, Gandhi did not advocate war. We know that because he argued that an eye for an eye will leave everyone blind. But in Gandhi's own lifetime, war happened. India faced aggression. In October 1947, India faced aggression, 10 weeks after freedom, from Pakistan on Kashmir. What did Gandhi do? What did Gandhiji do? Did he lie back and say, please be non-violent? No, in prayer meeting after prayer meeting, he exhorted the Indian army to fight back. He said soldiers will become martyrs because the state is under threat from aggression. Non-violence is not the answer to aggression. He made it very, very clear. So, what he did say and is being reflected, that do not start wars because wars are not a solution. That was the theme. But I'm sure this will also, invite other views on the subject. But Tariq, please.
Good evening. Namaskar. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. Sir, I'd like to make 2 points. One is that our diversity and inclusivity are also very important for brand Bharat. And the other thing is we should leverage our relations with the Arab, Gulf and Islamic countries for brand Bharat. First, regarding this diversity, you see the difference between countries, between India and China is we are a democratic country, we are a diverse country, we believe in inclusivity. All of us know that India consists of so many languages, cultures, religions, castes, tribes. So we are a diverse country. Our strength lies unity in diversity. The second thing is this, that the governance should also be inclusive. Whether it is the legislature or the executive, it should include people from all parts of the country, all castes, all tribes, all sections of society. I think this will help in brand Bharat. The second thing is that, as the External Affairs Minister had also pointed out that in response to a question from one of the participants, we must leverage our excellent relations with the Gulf, Arab and Islamic countries in promoting brand Bharat. Now, why the Gulf is important for India? There are 4 reasons why the Gulf and the Arab are very important for India. One is that 9 million Indians, they live in the Gulf. 3.5 million, they are living in UAE. And 2.5 million, they are living in Saudi Arabia. And in other, the Gulf cooperation countries. Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, apart from Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Second is 55% of our foreign remittances, they come from the Gulf. 55% of the NRI remittances. 20% of the total, they come from UAE and 15% from Saudi Arabia. Third is 40% of our fuel imports, they are from the Gulf and from Iran. Recently, we are having more imports from Russia because they are giving us discounted oil and other things. But ultimately, because of the geographical proximity, we'll have more import and we'll be having a bilateral relationship regarding this thing. Fourth is the trade. Gulf is also important for trade also. Because Saudi Arabia and as well as UAE, they are one of the important trade partners of India. And in the last 10 years, the relations which India had with the Gulf countries, they have become a benchmark of our foreign policy. Because Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given so much importance to relations with the Gulf and with the Arab countries. No other predecessor has given that importance. Multiple times he has visited UAE, Saudi Arabia, and these Gulf countries. Earlier, our relationship with them was just trade, that we were importing oil and giving some goods. Now it is a strategic relationship which we are having. It is defense cooperation also, counter-terrorism also, sea piracy also, organized crime also, drugs also. So the ambit of the relationship has increased a lot. 1 year back, we had a proposal that there should be a India-West Asia European corridor. It has been put on hold because of the war in Gaza and Lebanon. But when things will stabilize, this is a big idea. And as the foreign minister had also said in his address, you have to take so many people on board to implement such a big thing. So that will also help in Bread India if we are able to, in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, if we are able to have this important trade corridor of India, West Asia and Europe, in which we need the cooperation of Saudi Arabia, UAE as well as of Israel, because we will need the Haifa port for this. The other important thing which the Prime Minister and India has done is to navigate the Indian foreign policy that we are having good relations with the Arab countries as well as with Israel. But earlier we thought that if we are going to have good relations with Israel, we will antagonize the Arab countries. So this goes to the credit of the Prime Minister and to you also, because you were also the Foreign Minister. The Minister of External Affairs, you have a lot of expertise in Central Asia and West Asia. And you were one of the pioneers of this policy, that we should have good relations with both the Arab countries as well as with Israel. Prime Minister Modi visited both Israel. He also visited Palestine also. And he has been awarded so many honors by so many of the West Asian countries, including by UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman. And as the Foreign Minister also said, we are also having good relations not only with the Arab countries, but also with other Muslim countries also. For example, with Indonesia. and with other non-Gulf countries also, like Egypt. The president of Egypt came and he was chief guest in the Republic Day celebrations, and with Jordan also. And we are seeing improvement in relations with other countries also. So this thing which has happened in the last 1 decade, this should be leveraged for brand Bharat.
Great. Just to get back to the global order, which is the theme of our thing, and I think what ideas that we can, what do we believe are going to be the decisive ideas that will determine either global order or global disorder? Just to throw up thoughts, just to encourage you to, again, think as radically differently as you might be able to. Is democracy going to be an order that will determine, going to be an idea that will determine global order? Or is it already exhausted itself? Can we eliminate fear from the global order? Fear is one of the biggest compulsions of violence. Right? We know it. It's a fact. Can we liberate the world from fear? Please.
My answer is no.
Yes, very good.
We cannot eliminate fear. Maybe, I don't know, 300 years in the future, who knows? But realistically, there are some bad people in the world. They want to do bad things, and we're afraid that our dear ones will be hit. That is the case in almost every country we know. Terrorism is one example. Even countries that are not in conflict with another suddenly are attacked by terrorists. And there are also, I guess the Ukrainians before the war were sitting in their homes watching football, and one day they heard missiles falling on them, and there was a war. So I think that we should realistically look at this in this sense, mainly on the issue of what is the role of democracy in the international arena. Currently, I would say very little. And the reason is that the main international organizations have nothing to do with democracy, meaning the UN is not a democratic club, it's everyone. So you can have North Korea as chairman of the Human Rights Commission, right? Or, I don't know, China overseeing a democratic transition somewhere. It's a bit strange. So this is one example. But also, the last generation, the world order, as defined by George Bush in 1991, which is now maybe coming to an end, that world order, after the end of the Cold War, was that the US is the policeman of the world. So the US, a democratic country, helped by the European Union, tried to impose, let's say, a liberal and democratic tendency everywhere. So indeed, in this decade, we saw relatively more countries becoming democratic. Now, as this seems to be weakening, the interest of the US in propping up regimes all over the world is shrinking. I'm assuming that actually it will be harder for democracies. My own view is that the answer to this should be an initiative, maybe India could lead it, to create an organization of democratic countries, saying we have something in common. It's not, I'm not saying replace the UN or replace something, saying an organization of democratic countries, thinking we have common things, common ideas, and I think that usually, not always, democratic countries tend to be less aggressive, less going to war. If there is a war, the population wants to stop it because they, so in this sense, I think this could be a tool for at least, let's say, reintroducing democracy as a factor on the international arena.
Sir, you were saying something.
Well, I've been struck as I look around the world at how we see rising instability geopolitically, whether it's the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza and Lebanon, what's going on in Sudan and other parts of Africa, the sort of growing crisis around the island of Taiwan. So we can certainly see a negative trend there. But I think there's another negative trend that we need to think about, which is that how, in a sense, war is introducing itself into new domains so that the difference between a state of war and a state of peace is narrowing. And what do I mean by that? Well, the most obvious example that we've all lived with is terrorism, where it's not war in the sense of one state attacking another, but it's a state of violence with a political aim that's imposed on one country. You've had a lot of experience of that here in South Asia. But it's also, think about the cyber world. Think about every day, if you follow this news, countries or hackers who are often supported by states are literally attacking the infrastructure, we can say, of other states, are trying to physically see if they can break through the safeguards around hydroelectric plants or weapons plants or other things to prepare the way for sabotage, not merely intelligence gathering. And so we are in what in the past I think people would have called that a state of war of a kind. And then also think about the cell phones and the computers that you and your children have at home, and international actors are intruding themselves. We've just seen a scandal in the US where apparently the Chinese now have the ability to listen to every cell phone conversation in the United States. I have to say they will probably be bored to death by the content of most of these cell phone conversations. But we are seeing international actors intervening in the households of ordinary citizens who are not even engaged. And so the world as a whole is drifting toward a state of rising conflict, some of which we call war, some of which we don't really have a name for yet. And I would say this should make the quest for peace, it obviously makes it more difficult because we're not even quite sure how do we define it, much less how do we achieve it and defend it. But it makes it much more important that we try, because in fact the arrows are pointing in the wrong direction. And all of us are becoming less secure to the degree that India, in its presence on the international stage, its ability to build bridges, as in the Middle East and elsewhere, can play a positive role in helping humanity turn away from this abyss at our feet, then I think we will see brand Bharat move to an entirely different level.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very important point that you've raised, extremely, because if we can't discuss the role of technology and invasive technology, are 5 billionaires or multi-billionaires or trillionaires going to control the world, and are they going to be more powerful than the state? We don't know. And that is what I mean by discussing a reality 10 years down the line which is beyond our imagination.
Exactly.
Right? And that is really, we must have more views on this subject, whether it will be a Musk, Bezos, God knows who's the next person in town. And as for listening to the conversation, that is passé. It's, war by other means has moved into much more dark interiors. Right?
I'm afraid into biology labs as well.
In the biology labs, that's really something that we are not even aware of. We have no clue as to what is happening. So civilization, how does civilization interact, or our concept of civilization interact with, such, what would be called almost personalized war? War by other means seems a very, very weak phrase to define this.
I think taking the Macaulay argument a little forward, the present, your point also, the present world order, there is no legitimacy to it. The post-Second World War multilateral order is really not legitimate. The fact that India is not on the Security Council is the biggest symbol there, but the fact is, it is no longer legitimate. So if you have India has no veto and is not on the Security Council, but India is what it is. That's the reality, should be there. So my own feeling is if the system can't be reformed, that is not only the UN, the other Bretton Woods institutions as well, then this will have to be disrupted. That is Musk's solution to issues as well. What cannot be reformed, you disrupt. Now, I'm not saying maybe there is a Gandhian way of doing this disruption, because if it's not done in a peaceful way, this will implode, because today the United Nations really is not legitimate anymore. It is not relevant to any of the key conflicts that are going on. Bretton Woods institutions as well, the legitimacy can be challenged. That's why you have the BRICS, you have other institutions coming up. So I think in this era of disruption, the era of technology, billionaires thinking the way they are doing, we need to think of the world order also that way. Reform or disrupt, and find something else. And India could be, you are working within the system now. This is continuing the Macaulay way probably, but maybe it's time to look at disrupting this order in a responsible way. Because the biggest injustice is the fact that India is not in the Security Council. It's just, by no stretch of imagination, can you justify the legitimacy of an order that leaves India out? It's easy for me to say, coming from a country of 22 million people, that you should disrupt, but all I'm saying is that this is a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of us would definitely agree on that, but here something has been raised which is extremely important, and it must be the nightmare of tonight. That by 2035, are we going to end up in a state of permanent war? War is no longer declared. War is being practiced and done every day. And with the control of technology, are we going to get into forms of biological war, which we have with unbelievable consequences? You will find enough theories about COVID, right? Yes. I'm sure most of the theories belong to the edge of, who knows, disbelief, if nothing else. I'm using very polite language, please note. But the fact is that who is going to stop you from, indulging in COVID wars?
And if you think about arms control, nuclear weapons were a terrible thing, but you can have treaties on arms control, they can be verifiable. It's a big industrial effort to develop nuclear weapons. It's a big industrial effort to build missiles and missile silos, and other countries can see, at least to some degree, whether there's complying. But what about a cyber capability? What about a biological warfare laboratory? These are much more easily concealed. And so without a possibility of verification, how do I sign an arms control treaty with somebody that I don't trust? These are new puzzles that probably a generation younger than us is going to have to address, but they're real and they are with us today.
And, labs are working on it. It isn't as if there are no labs on this subject, except that nobody puts out an ad advertising that they do. But every state is doing it. So, The future is bacteria?
Two points. That one is that was just raised here. I think there's something to do with, from two directions, the weakening in many cases of the state. Meaning, what we're seeing, for various reasons, it's very clear in the Middle East, but in other places where the rise of these terrorist entities is a direct result of the state not being strong enough to stop them. So things like ISIS, even Al-Qaeda when it was in Afghanistan and so on. We're seeing in Eastern Europe, let's say in the Russian zone, all kinds of quasi-states or entities. In Crimea is this, and this Republic of the Donbass is that, and you have Abkhazia in Georgia. So we see all these, and of course, Hezbollah inside Lebanon, and militias inside Syria, and so on. So I think that this reality actually is spreading. There is a similar situation also in Sudan. So I think that part of it is that for various reasons, the state itself is getting weaker. But on the opposite side is a trend that is in some sense going against more wars, is that people don't have children anymore. And you know that usually young men go to war, not old men. So,
so that leaves us all out.
Exactly. But what I mean is that certainly, an important factor, for example, in many countries, a country that has, a country like South Korea, there are no children, no one wants to go to war, and and it used to be until very recently a problem of very few developed countries, but now it's everywhere. I hear that even in India, only Bihar has more than replacement level birth rate, or maybe some are like 2.1, but so think of this is India, still around 2 children, average, but in many other countries it's 1.5, 1.1, and this, I think, it has many negative effects, but one effect that maybe is not that negative is that maybe it pushes countries to be less warlike because there is no army. So.
You are very optimistic. But let me raise a question for both of you, since are we seeing the end of geography? Are nation states defined by borders now crumbling under technology? Of course. Which technology recognizes borders? Yep. Number 2, are borders irrelevant to biological warfare, to bacteria? Bacteria which is going to travel through water, through oceans, right? What is the state of geography that you see in 2035? Geography, just to give you a little more example, in large parts of Africa, geography doesn't exist. Right or wrong? Yes, sir. Please. No, you, whatever.
Geography is, in Africa, it may not be existing earlier also, but I don't think the nation states will disappear. Of course, technology and, as you have said, the biological warfare, they are threats for the future of mankind. And you have raised a very valid point. But I think the nation states, they will be further strengthened. They will not disappear. And regarding this global order, I just want to make 2 small points. Now, all of us know that the United States is the most important country, economically and military also. And the President of the United States is the most important person. With the advent of Mr. Donald Trump as President of the United States, India has the opportunity to enhance the Bharat brand, Because Donald Trump is favorably predisposed towards India and especially towards our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi and to other politicians also. So this gives an opportunity. For example, trade. He is saying that 60% I'll impose 60% tariff on all Chinese goods and 10% across the board. So 10% for India and other countries 60% for China. This gives an opportunity to us to have a FTA, bilateral FTA, but then we have to be less protection. We will be providing less protection to our big corporates and we can have greater access to American technology. So this gives us an opportunity. The other thing is that in global order, we cannot please everybody. Our natural allies are the United States and Western countries for various reasons. One is the China factor. China factor is very important. Why India should be closer to the Western countries. Second is the common values which we share. Democracy, free speech, transparency. And third is the people-to-people relations. Everybody wants to go to the United States and to Europe for education. How many people want to go to other countries? So for these three reasons, I think brand Bharat will be strengthened if we move closer to the Western countries. And many of our politicians, they have got very good relations with the incoming administration. Ram Madhavji also has got very good relations with some of them. He went to attend wedding of one of the very important person who has been appointed as director of the National Intelligence Agency. He went to attend the wedding also. Brought the Gita also and gave it to the Prime Minister on which he had taken oath as member of the House of Representatives. So we should also make use of this opportunity which we are having of the favorable environment which will be created for India when Donald Trump assumes office as president.
I think your question, in my view, geography will remain important from a strategic and economic perspective. The old Westphalian construct, how that will hold into the future, I can't say, but I think it may evolve into something. But identity will become very important, I think. So in the context, although geography may shift around, identity will become key and technology will assist in that as well because you can develop that in a virtual form. And but I think geography for strategic purposes and also for economic purposes will of course be important. That's my view.
Well, I don't think the one thing that we can be absolutely certain about is that we are uncertain.
Yes, of course.
And that itself now I think is a good point at which we could open up the discussion to our friends here and ask for questions if there are any to.
Thank you, sir. My question will be to Walter, sir. So both Trump and Elon Musk, they have been against the mainstream media. And now with the win of Trump, so will there be a change of the attitude of the US or the Western media against India, towards India, or will US media ever be favorable to brand Bharat? Thank you, sir.
Well, I'm part of U.S. media. I write a column in the Wall Street Journal, and here I am. So I think we shouldn't say everything is of one kind. I don't think the media in the West is going to pay a lot of attention. They think about Trump, and that's one box. And they think about India, that's another box. But what I think we see is a group of, and I think you may have this here in India too, that for many years, generations, a relatively small group of well-credentialed, well-educated, more or less, people were able to control the ways in which the state was presented itself to the people. Whether it's on broadcast, in print media, or whatever, that is a very powerful position. And they grew used to thinking that this was natural and in the order of things, that the intellectual certified media person can be the gatekeeper. But with technological change, that is no longer possible. And as a writer, you depend, you're much more at the mercy of your readers. And if your readers don't like the sources, the kind of information that you're bringing them, they can look elsewhere very easily. And so an embittered, declining media class looks at politicians who it thinks are perhaps responsible for its misfortunes or happy about its misfortunes, and their anger is redoubled. So I would expect some of these media attitudes to become sharper as the situation of the media themselves becomes more difficult, but perhaps also their attitudes will be less influential and less important.
But Walter, you should touch on the fact that the meaning of media is now changed beyond recognition.
Well, exactly. It's we used to, when I was a kid in the United States, we had 3 television networks, 3.5 because we had a small public television system, and that was it. We also, by the way, had 1 phone company, and the phone company's response was, well, if you don't like our service, don't have a phone. It's very simple. And so as we've seen media proliferate in numbers of channels and then into social media, which is not centrally controlled, but the grassroots communicating with each other, the entire structure of power around information is changing.
Nidhi Bahuguna, I wanted to ask you 2 questions. One was that because population is decreasing, so we may not have wars, but the way the warfare is changing, you don't really need a big army now to actually go into war. And the second question on geography, on one side we are emphasizing access to Central Asia, that is Indian-centric. So how can you say geography will become irrelevant? Just 2 questions.
Okay, so as to you need less people to wage a war, I don't think that's the case. Actually, all the theories about, I don't know, maybe somehow has in his head that robots will fight each other or something like that. Eventually, it doesn't matter, because if you have 1 million robots and the other side have 1 million, they kill each other. Until it gets to killing people, no one cares. And when it gets to killing people, you have people to defend them. And unfortunately, Israel is facing exactly that after the attacks on October 7th. Indeed, I would say that the war in Ukraine that we are seeing is mainly fought on who has more soldiers. Because Russia, although it's 3 or 4 times the population of Ukraine, doesn't have enough soldiers to fight, so it has to import people from North Korea to fight. What do they need Russia? Why does it need the North Korean soldiers? Because there are not enough young Russians that want to fight for Russia. That's the truth. So they're bringing mercenaries, they're bringing people from jail. So I'm saying in the last few years, there have been polls in many European countries asking young Europeans, would you be willing to fight and possibly die for your country? And in many countries, like the Netherlands and so on, the answers are like 12%, 13%, 15% of all young people are saying, if my country is attacked, I'm willing to defend it. Because many of them are only children, or they're thinking, yes, I can go over to Canada or something like that. So the whole disposition of new generation, naturally, not all countries are like that, certainly. But what I'm saying, this is a general trend in culture and not not something irrelevant.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi. My question is in relation to India-US relationship. Henry Kissinger once said, being a enemy of US is dangerous, and being a friend of US is fatal. In this insight, see, when everything is going good between India and US, why always US tries to deteriorate the relationship with India by meddling during election time, by releasing index like hunger index, happiness index, or press freedom index, where India is lagging behind Afghanistan, Pakistan, and similarly, intergang rivalry killing and linking it with, as far as Home Minister, Prime Minister, to that extent. Till yesterday, it is linked to the Prime Minister. And similarly, meddling in India's neighborhood by regime change operation in Bangladesh. Why US always tries to deteriorate its relationship with ally called India, which is a trusted ally. Is there any improvement which we can see during Trump's era?
Well, we'll have to address it to our ranking American.
Well, I think one thing we can say is we have to separate out some things that for example, if Freedom House issues a report that is uncomplimentary to the United States, to India, the United States government has nothing to do with this. This is an action by a civil society, just as a group in India can publish a report about some country and the governments can either agree or disagree, but it's its own agency. There's not one controlling force in the United States that coordinates all of these branches. And I'll give you an example too of, say, an index of religious freedom put out by the State Department, for example. This is often something that the president of the day does not control. It was created by an act of Congress many years ago. And it's supposed to come out on, who knows, the third Tuesday of November, we will say, every year. The people who write this report work in a part of the State Department that is very much focused on human rights, and they know that their real boss is not the Secretary of State, is not the President of the United States, it's the two senators on the committee who really care about this. Excuse me, this was not supposed to happen.
That's Freedom House calling you.
That's right, saying, wait a minute, it's the government telling me I'm getting it wrong. So they, and so the government may decide this is our year of being good to Saudi Arabia. Let's make friends with Saudi Arabia, is what the president wants to do. And then the State Department comes out with a real stinker of a report about religious freedom in Saudi Arabia. And naturally in Saudi Arabia, they go, wait a minute, you said you wanted to be our friend and now you're issuing this terrible report. All right. So it's not a coordinated thing often. I think if the Biden administration were as hostile to the Modi government as some people believe it is, and it fully controlled everything that was going on in the US government, perhaps the news about this indictment would have come early enough to have an impact on the Maharashtra election, right? So very poor planning if it's a big central conspiracy. Now that doesn't mean that the United States government and even the president don't sometimes have an agenda which does not mesh with what the Indian government would like, and even more when it comes to dealing with third countries. That the United States doesn't give India a veto over its Sri Lanka policy any more than India would give the United States a veto over its Sri Lanka policy. This is normal business. So and that's because it is normal business, it's probably not going to change all that much. But I do think a Trump administration, whatever else it is going to be less focused on questions of ideology and more questions of practicality. And when that involves power relationships and the balance of power, that's probably good for Indian US India relations. When it involves, as other panelists have noted, when it involves economic issues and trade, that orientation may be more difficult.
Or, to put it in one sentence, democracy is messy.
Messy on both sides, yes.
So
Sorry.
mine is more of a comment than a question. The prediction for the next decade can be summed up in 2 words: Akhand Bharat. Thank you.
I'm Ashwin Raika. When we are imagining Bharat's next decade, that is 2035, we heard of chip wars, we heard of biological wars. I think we missed out an important aspect of quantum computing. China has made significant progress in that. I'm sure our American friends have also made significant progress. And I'm aware that India has also allocated a lot of funds and our IITs are working on it. And it could have a huge significance on our national security as we move forward. So I'd like to hear panel's opinion on the quantum side. Thank you.
I didn't hear the question very good.
The question is basically what would be the impact of quantum computing?
Oh, well, not being a specialist on quantum computing, I would say that it seems that many technologies probably but I would say even more than that, artificial intelligence is going to, because yesterday someone proposed that India continue today in the morning. Anyway, in one of the panels, someone mentioned that India continue to grow with the service industry, being, for instance, people answering the phone and so on. But the point is that these technologies might overtake it, because now if you have an AI, you don't need a call center, you have an AI doing it. So actually, I think that in economic terms, a lot of these new technologies are going to change. And I'm not talking in 50 years, I'm talking very soon. A lot of assumptions about, economy and development. So.
All change is disruptive.
Yes.
And this change is deeply disruptive. So, final question, please.
Thank you. Namaste, my name is Prateek. The question is, does the panel recognize the role of wokeism as a form of social warfare? And
Role of?
Wokeism, W-O-K-E,
Oh,
wokeism
wokeism.
as a form of social warfare, comments on West's export of wokeism, and comments on how Bharat can fight against it and bring sanity to this entirely insane space that's occupying media and children's cartoons. So that's the question. Thank you.
Good question. Any good answers?
Not a good answer, but
Speaking for myself, I would hope that India would launch a counterattack, and that the forces of Bharat would come to America and wipe it out. But look, I don't think this, while there may be some sympathy for wokeism in part of the Biden administration, in general, you look at Joe Biden, he strikes me as kind of looking like an old white man. He's probably not sitting around trying to impose wokeism on the United States, much less on India. Whether you like it or not, I personally am not very fond of it in general. It is a social movement by groups within society who have a certain vision and a certain agenda. There's not a lot that governments can do, but I do note in the United States there really does seem to be more and more of a reaction, of a pushback. And my hope is that as we and as others experience this, we will take what is good there, and there's nothing that has no good in it, and we will try to respond to that, but we will get past some of these, I think, exaggerated and divisive elements within it, and try to get back to working together. If we don't work together, nothing is going to succeed.
If I just made a comment on this,
please.
I think that wokeism is being distributed more by cultural factors than governments.
Yeah.
I don't know if any government in the world that says we are woke. But in fact, someone mentioned children's cartoon and so on. And so I think that on the cultural level, if someone watches films coming from the US, or even Europe, but mainly the US, in the last few years, you will see that all these gender-neutral figures and diversity and stuff is filling everything. And actually on this front, I would say that perhaps culturally, India, as Walter said, can contribute significantly. And actually I saw a movie a few years ago, a very successful Indian movie called RRR. So, so the point about this movie, it cannot have been made, maybe in America in 1980, but not in America in 2024, because it's very patriotic, right? So I'm saying, I'm not saying that you should be a RRR cartoon for children, but the point is that if there is a cultural activity in India that is more patriotic, less woke, then this could be a way. I think there is, I mean, all over the world, in America, in Europe, people want this content. So if you would produce it, I think that people will.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you very much. And I think one phrase or one term that we haven't used so far in this 80 minutes that we've been together, but I truly believe in it, and so I can't help but mention it, and which is the power of common sense. And the power of common sense is so important in the evolution of the human race in whatever dramatic terms it takes. We have concentrated on the power of elites, on the power of factotums, on the power of manipulators, on the power of influencers, but nothing in human history is more powerful than the power of common sense. And let's hope to God that common sense prevails from us becoming completely self-destructive. Thank you.